The wagon wheel broke with a sickening crack as Katherine O'Brien doubled over in pain, her scream piercing the empty Wyoming wilderness like a gunshot. It was May 1875, and what had started as a hopeful journey west had transformed into a desperate race against nature itself. Both the approaching thunderstorm and the child determined to enter the world weeks before Katherine had planned. "Not now, little one," she whispered, cradling her swollen belly as another contraction gripped her. "Please, not here." The nearest town, Lusk, according to the weathered sign she'd passed hours ago, was still miles away across the rugged terrain. Katherine had been traveling alone for 3 months since leaving St. Louis, a widow at 24, carrying not just her unborn child but the weight of broken dreams. Her husband Patrick had succumbed to pneumonia during the harsh winter, leaving her with nothing but a promise they'd made together to start anew in Wyoming territory, where land was plentiful and the future untamed. The wagon listed precariously to one side, the broken wheel rendering it useless. Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, turning the dirt beneath the wagon into mud. Katherine tried to climb down but collapsed against the side, her body betraying her as the contractions intensified. Through the curtain of rain, a silhouette appeared on horseback, approaching at a gallop from the eastern horizon. Katherine could barely raise her hand to signal for help before another contraction seized her. "Madam, you all right?" The deep voice cut through the rainfall as the rider dismounted in one fluid motion. His tall frame came into view, broad shoulders beneath a rain-soaked duster, a weathered Stetson pulled low over eyes that assessed the situation quickly. "The baby," Katherine managed between labored breaths. "It's coming." The stranger's expression shifted from concern to determination. "I'm Zachary Malone," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "Ranch hand from the Double Creek, about 10 miles northwest." He glanced at the broken wagon, then back at Katherine. "Looks like I'm arriving just in time." Rain pelted the canvas covering of the wagon as Zachary helped Katherine inside, his strong hands surprisingly gentle. "You got a name, madam?" he asked, arranging blankets to make her more comfortable. Katherine O'Brien," she replied through gritted teeth. "Well, Mrs. O'Brien, I've delivered plenty of calves and foals, though I reckon human babies aren't much different in principle." His attempt at lightness did little to mask his concern. "It's Miss," she corrected, managing a weak smile despite the pain. "My husband. He passed this winter." Something flickered in Zachary's eyes, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a familiar pain. "I'm sorry for your loss. You're mighty brave traveling alone in your condition." "Not brave," Katherine gasped as another contraction came. "Desperate." The storm intensified outside, rain hammering against the canvas, wind threatening to tear it away. Inside, Zachary worked with efficient calm, boiling what little water remained in Katherine's supplies over a small stove, tearing clean cloth into strips and speaking in low, reassuring tones. "You're doing fine, Miss O'Brien. Just fine." Hours passed in a blur of pain and effort. Katherine lost track of time, aware only of Zachary's steady presence and her body's relentless work. When darkness fell completely, he lit a lantern that cast golden light across the cramped interior of the wagon. "I can see the head," Zachary announced finally, his voice steady despite the extraordinary circumstances. "One more big push should do it." Katherine gathered her remaining strength, bearing down with a cry that rose above the storm. Then, suddenly, the wagon was filled with a new sound, the indignant wail of a newborn taking his first breath. Zachary's hands, which had spent years breaking horses and mending fences, cradled the tiny red-faced infant with unexpected tenderness. He wrapped the boy in a clean shirt, his expression transforming with wonder. "You have a son, Miss O'Brien," he said, placing the squalling bundle in Katherine's arms. Then, to her surprise, Zachary gently touched the baby's cheek with one calloused finger and whispered, "Welcome home, son." The words hung in the air between them, simple yet somehow profound. Katherine looked up sharply, but saw only genuine emotion in Zachary's weather-lined face. "I didn't mean to presume," he said quickly, misinterpreting her expression. "It's just something my pa always said, that home isn't a place, it's wherever you're loved. And this little fella is clearly loved." Katherine felt tears mix with the sweat on her face. "Thank you," she whispered, looking down at her son's perfect features. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." "Fate has its ways," Zachary replied, busying himself with cleaning up. "What will you call him?" Katherine gazed at her son, thinking of the journey that had brought them here and the stranger whose kindness had ensured they would continue it. "James," she decided. "James Patrick O'Brien, strong name," Zachary approved. He moved to the wagon entrance, peering out at the storm. "Rain's letting up, but that wheel won't fix itself. Come morning, I'll take you both to Lusk. They've got a decent boarding house where you can recover before deciding your next move." "I was heading to Clearwater Creek," Katherine said, referring to a settlement she'd heard had fertile land and a small but growing community. "I have papers for a land claim there. Clearwater's 50 miles northwest," Zachary frowned. "Not a journey to make with a newborn and a broken wagon." He hesitated, then added, "Double Creek Ranch is closer. My employer, Mr. Hollister, is a fair man. He might have worked for you once you're recovered, cooking or mending, perhaps. The bunkhouse cook makes food that'd turn a coyote's stomach." "I couldn't impose," Katherine began, but Zachary shook his head. "It's not imposing when you're needed, and believe me, Miss O'Brien, anyone who can improve on Sour Pete's cooking would be most welcome." The sincerity in his voice made Katherine smile despite her exhaustion. "I'll consider it," she promised. Outside, the storm passed, leaving behind a world washed clean. Inside the broken wagon, an unlikely family of three: a widowed mother, her newborn son, and the cowboy who delivered him rested in the soft glow of the lantern, unaware that this chance meeting had forever altered the course of their lives. Morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out sometime during the night. Katherine awoke to find Zachary already outside, examining the broken wheel. Little James slept peacefully beside her, swaddled in the cleanest blankets Zachary had been able to find. She watched through the wagon opening as Zachary moved with practiced efficiency, his broad shoulders flexing beneath his shirt as he worked. There was something reassuring about his methodical approach, the way he assessed problems and set about solving them without complaint. "How is our patient this morning?" he called, noticing her watching. "Better," Katherine replied, surprised to find it true. Though sore and weak, she felt a new determination flowing through her veins alongside the joy of holding her son. And the wagon. Zachary wiped his brow, leaving a smudge of dirt across his tanned forehead. "The axle's cracked clean through, can't be fixed out here." He approached the wagon, leaning against the side. "I can rig a travois behind my horse to carry you and the little one to Lusk, but we'll have to leave most of your belongings." Katherine's heart sank. Everything she owned in the world was packed into this wagon: Patrick's books, her mother's china tea set, the patchwork quilt her grandmother had made for her wedding, and all the practical supplies she'd need to establish a home. "I can't just abandon it all," she protested. "You won't have to," Zachary assured her. "Once I get you settled, I can come back with a proper wagon and retrieve your things. Mr. Hollister won't mind me borrowing one of the ranch wagons for a day." Katherine studied his face, searching for any sign of deception, but found only honest concern. "Why would you do all this for strangers?" Zachary's eyes, a clear hazel that reminded Katherine of autumn fields, met her steadily. "Out here we look after each other, it's how we survive." He paused, then added more softly, "Besides, I've been where you are, stranded with a newborn." Katherine attempted humor to mask her vulnerability, a half-smile touched his lips. "Alone, starting over." He didn't elaborate further, but something in his expression told Katherine there was more to his story: pain he kept carefully tucked away. By midday, Zachary had constructed a travois using saplings and canvas from the wagon cover. He helped Katherine, still weak from childbirth, settle onto the makeshift conveyance with James secured against her chest, in a sling fashioned from one of her shawls. "It won't be the most comfortable ride," Zachary warned as he finished securing the travois to his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding he called Samson. "But Samson's sure-footed, and we'll take it slow." True to his word, Zachary led them at a gentle pace, walking beside the horse rather than riding, one hand on Samson's bridle and the other occasionally steadying the travois when they crossed rough ground. The journey took hours, with frequent stops for Katherine to nurse James or simply rest. During these pauses, they talked. Katherine learned that Zachary had come to Wyoming 5 years earlier after serving in the Union Army during the Civil War. He'd worked his way west, taking jobs as a ranch hand, tracker, and occasional deputy before settling at Double Creek. "The war left me restless," he explained during one stop as they shared jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. "Couldn't seem to stay in one place too long." "And now?" Katherine asked. Zachary gazed at the rolling landscape, his expression thoughtful. "Double Creek's been good to me. Mr. Hollister values hard work and loyalty over a man's past. I've been his foreman for 3 years now." "It sounds like you've found a home," Katherine observed. Something wistful flickered across his features. "A place to hang my hat, at least." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the small settlement of Lusk came into view, a cluster of wooden buildings straddling a rutted main street, with scattered homesteads dotting the surrounding prairie. "It ain't much," Zachary said apologetically, "but they've got a doctor of sorts. Jensen runs the general store but has some medical training, and Mrs. Whitaker's boarding house serves decent meals." The townspeople watched curiously as Zachary led his unusual procession down the main street. A few called greetings, which he answered with raised hand or nod, but he didn't stop until they reached a 2-story clapboard structure with a small, well-kept garden out front. Mrs. Whitaker proved to be a robust woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a practical manner that Katherine immediately appreciated. She took one look at Katherine and the baby, then began issuing instructions to Zachary about hot water and clean linens as if he were one of her own children rather than a ranch foreman. "You did right bringing her here, Zach Malone," she declared after hearing an abbreviated version of their story. "A woman needs proper care after birthing, not bouncing across the prairie on some contraption." Katherine was installed in the boarding house's best room, which featured an actual brass bed and a window overlooking the garden. Mrs. Whitaker shooed Zachary out while she helped Katherine wash and change into a borrowed nightgown, but he returned later with Dr. Jensen, who pronounced both mother and child remarkably well considering the circumstances. "You did a fine job delivering this young man, Malone," Jensen said, packing away his stethoscope. "Might have missed your calling as a doctor." Zachary shook his head, embarrassed by the praise. "Just did what needed doing." After the doctor left, Zachary lingered awkwardly at Katherine's bedside. "I'll head back for your belongings tomorrow," he promised. "Should have them here by nightfall." "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness," Katherine said, holding James close as he slept. "No need," Zachary assured her. "But I meant what I said about Double Creek. Once you've recovered, Mr. Hollister could use someone to help with the cooking and household matters. His wife passed 2 years back and the place has suffered for a woman's touch." Katherine considered the offer. Her original plan had been to claim her own land, but with a newborn to care for, the prospect of building a homestead alone seemed suddenly daunting. A position at the ranch would provide shelter and income while she regained her strength and planned her next steps. "I'll think on it," she promised. Zachary nodded, satisfied. "Rest now. You've had quite an adventure, Miss O'Brien." As he turned to leave, Katherine called after him softly. "Zachary," he paused at the door, silhouetted against the hallway light. "Thank you for everything." His smile was brief but genuine. "Sleep well, Katherine. You too, young James. After he departed, Katherine lay in the unfamiliar bed, her son's warm weight against her chest, and contemplated the strange turn her journey had taken. She had set out to find independence and a fresh start, not to place herself in the debt of a quiet cowboy with kind eyes and capable hands. Yet somehow, as she drifted toward sleep in the safety of Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house, the future seemed less frightening than it had in weeks. Perhaps Wyoming had already begun to offer the new beginning she sought, just not in the way she had imagined. The following days established a routine. True to his word, Zachary retrieved Katherine's possessions from the abandoned wagon, carefully transporting everything from her practical cooking implements to her most treasured keepsakes. He stored what wouldn't fit in her boarding house room in Mrs. Whittaker's shed, meticulously inventoried on a list in his surprisingly neat handwriting. Each day, he would ride into town on some errand or another for the ranch supplies from Jensen's store, mail from the small post office, or equipment from the blacksmith, and each day, he would find time to visit Katherine and James. At first, his visits were brief and practical. He would inquire after their health, report on the retrieval of their belongings, or bring news from Double Creek Ranch about the position he'd mentioned. But as days turned into a week, the visits lengthened. Katherine found herself looking forward to his quiet presence, the careful way he would hold James when she needed to rest, and the thoughtful questions he asked about her life before Wyoming. "You said your husband died this winter," he remarked one afternoon as they sat in Mrs. Whittaker's parlor, James sleeping in a cradle the landlady had unearthed from her attic. "That can't have left much time to prepare for this journey." Katherine's fingers twisted in her lap. "We'd been planning it for nearly a year. Patrick was a schoolteacher in St. Louis, but he dreamed of open spaces and land of our own." She smiled sadly at the memory. "When he fell ill, he made me promise to continue west without him, said our child deserved the future we'd planned together." "He must have been a good man," Zachary observed quietly. "He was," Katherine agreed. "Kind, thoughtful, full of dreams." She looked up, meeting Zachary's gaze. "We'd been married just over a year when he died." Understanding passed between them, the recognition of loss and the courage it took to continue afterward. Zachary didn't offer empty condolences or prying questions, only a respectful nod that somehow meant more than flowery words of sympathy. "And you," Katherine ventured after a moment. "You mentioned being alone. Were you ever married?" A shadow crossed Zachary's features. "No, madam." "Came close once before the war. Elizabeth was her name." His voice softened on the name, revealing an old tenderness. "Her father owned the largest farm in our county back in Pennsylvania. I worked his fields every summer from the time I was 16. "What happened?" Katherine asked gently. "The war," Zachary replied simply. "I enlisted in 61, full of patriotic notions. By the time I came home in 65, Elizabeth had married a merchant who'd managed to avoid the fighting." There was no bitterness in his tone, only a resigned acceptance. "Can't say I blame her. The boy she'd promised to marry wasn't the man who returned." They sat in companionable silence until James stirred in his cradle. As Katherine lifted him, she noticed Zachary watching with an expression that mingled wistfulness and warmth. "You're good with him," she observed. "Most bachelors I've known would run a mile from a crying infant." Zachary smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "My sister had 4 little ones back home. I helped with them whenever I visited." His smile faded slightly. "Haven't seen them in years, though." Letters come slow out here. The revelation of this family connection made Katherine curious about the man who had so drastically altered her circumstances. "Do you miss Pennsylvania?" Zachary considered this as he helped Katherine settle James for nursing, respectfully averting his eyes once the baby was positioned. "I miss the people sometimes. The place, not so much. Too crowded, too many reminders." He glanced out the window at the vast Wyoming landscape. "Out here a man can breathe, start fresh." "That's what I hope to find," Katherine admitted. A place where no one knows me as poor Mrs. O'Brien, the widow, or looks at me with pity. Folks around here judge you on what you do, not what's happened to you, Zachary assured her. Speaking of which, Mr. Hollister asked when you might be ready to consider his offer. No pressure, he added quickly, but calving season's coming and we'll have a full bunkhouse of cowhands needing feeding. Katherine had been giving the matter considerable thought. While she still longed for a place of her own, the practical challenges of homesteading with a newborn were daunting. The position at Double Creek would provide security while she regained her strength and saved additional funds. I believe I'm ready to meet Mr. Hollister, she decided. Perhaps you could arrange it, Zachary's face brightened. He's coming to town tomorrow for the livestock auction. I could bring him by afterward. And so it was arranged. The following afternoon, Katherine found herself seated in Mrs. Whittaker's best parlor, wearing her one good dress let out to accommodate her still recovering figure, with James freshly bathed and swaddled in her arms, awaiting the arrival of the man who might become her employer. Elias Hollister proved to be a study in contrasts to his foreman. Where Zachary was tall and lean, Hollister was of medium height with the sturdy build of a man who had worked hard his entire life. Silver threaded his dark beard, and deep lines framed eyes that assessed Katherine with frank appraisal. "Miss O'Brien," he greeted her with a slight bow. "Zach here has told me of your predicament, says you're interested in the housekeeper position at Double Creek." "I am, Mr. Hollister," Katherine confirmed. "I'm experienced in cooking, sewing, and household management. My late husband and I ran a boarding house for students before his passing." Hollister nodded, seemingly pleased with her directness. "The position includes room and board for you and the little one," he explained, gesturing toward James. "Separate quarters in the main house. My wife's sister lived there until she remarried last year. Wage is $20 a month with Sundays free unless we've got special circumstances like Roundup." The terms were fair, better than Katherine had expected, in fact. "That's generous, sir." "Good help's worth paying for," Hollister said matter-of-factly. "Ranch is 15 miles northwest of town. Not much in the way of society out there, just me, Zach here, and 8 to 10 hands depending on the season. Would that isolation trouble you?" "No, sir," Katherine replied confidently. "I came west for a new start, not for society." This answer seemed to satisfy Hollister. He stroked his beard thoughtfully, then asked, "The baby's father? Is he in the picture?" Katherine felt a flush of both grief and indignation at the question, but before she could respond, Zachary stepped forward. "Miss O'Brien is widowed, sir," he said, his tone respectful but firm. "Her husband passed before the child was born." Hollister had the grace to look abashed. "Meant no offense, madam, just needed to know if we should expect any complications." "There will be none, Mr. Hollister," Katherine assured him, appreciating Zachary's intervention but determined to speak for herself. "My focus is providing for my son and building our future." "That's all I needed to hear," Hollister declared, extending his hand to seal their agreement. "Zach will collect you in the ranch Wagon day after tomorrow, if that suits." As Katherine shook his hand, she felt a strange mixture of relief and trepidation. Her journey was taking yet another unexpected turn, leading her not to the independent homestead she had envisioned, but to a position of dependence on the goodwill of strangers. Yet as she glanced at Zachary, standing quietly by the parlor door, she couldn't help feeling that perhaps fate had intervened for a reason. The cowboy who had delivered her son, who had whispered "welcome home" in that broken wagon during the storm, had become a lifeline in a wilderness that might otherwise have overwhelmed her. 2 days later, Katherine stood on Mrs. Whittaker's porch with James bundled against the morning chill, watching Zachary secure her trunks in the back of a well-maintained farm wagon. Mrs. Whittaker fussed beside her, pressing a basket of food into her hands and offering last-minute advice. "Elias Hollister's a fair employer, but set your boundaries early," the older woman counseled. "And mind you bring that baby back to visit me. First infant born in Lusk this spring deserves special attention." Katherine promised, genuinely touched by the landlady's affection for James. In just over a week, the boarding house had begun to feel like a temporary home, largely due to Mrs. Whittaker's maternal care. The journey to Double Creek Ranch took most of the day, with stops to rest the horses and tend to James. As they traveled, the landscape changed, subtly rolling prairie giving way to more varied terrain with scattered stands of pine and aspen, and eventually the creek that gave the ranch its name, flowing clear and swift between rocky banks. Mr. Hollister's father established the ranch in '54, Zachary explained as they followed the creek northward. One of the first permanent settlements in this part of Wyoming. Started with just 100 head of longhorns driven up from Texas, but now runs close to 1,000 head of improved stock. It sounds impressive, Katherine remarked, trying to imagine the scope of such an operation. It is, Zachary agreed, pride evident in his voice. Hollister was progressive enough to cross the longhorns with Hereford bulls. Makes for hardier cattle that fetch better prices at market. As the wagon crested a final rise, Double Creek Ranch spread before them, a collection of well-maintained buildings nestled in a natural bowl formed by gentle hills. The main house, constructed of squared logs with a proper shingled roof, stood at the center, flanked by a large barn, bunkhouse, smithy, and various outbuildings. Fenced corrals contained horses and cattle, while smoke rose invitingly from the house's stone chimney. "It's beautiful," Katherine breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. After months of transience, the solid permanence of the ranch building stirred a longing she hadn't expected. "Home," Zachary said simply, guiding the wagon down the slope. Their arrival caused a minor stir. Several cowboys emerged from the barn and bunkhouse to observe the newcomers, while Hollister himself appeared on the main house porch, pipe in hand. "Welcome to Double Creek, Miss O'Brien," he called as Zachary helped her down from the wagon. "Zach, show her to the back quarters, then have the boys bring in her things." The back quarters proved to be a surprisingly spacious addition to the main house, accessible both from outside and through a door connecting to the kitchen. It contained a bedroom large enough for Katherine's bed and James's cradle, a small sitting room with a window overlooking the creek, and even a tiny private washroom, a luxury Katherine hadn't expected. Mrs. Hollister insisted on proper accommodations when her sister came to live with them, Zachary explained as he showed her around. She believed a woman needed her own space, especially on a ranch full of men. "She sounds like a wise woman," Katherine commented, noting the feminine touches that remained: curtains at the windows, a cushioned rocking chair, a small bookshelf. "She was," Zachary agreed quietly. "Cancer took her 2 summers ago, hit Mr. Hollister hard. The place hasn't been the same since." Katherine's heart softened at this information. She knew firsthand how losing a spouse could upend one's entire world. "I'll do my best to restore some comfort to his home," she promised. The next weeks were a period of adjustment as Katherine established her place in the ranch hierarchy. The cowhands, initially awkward around her, soon warmed to her presence, especially after her cooking replaced the dismal fare they'd endured since Mrs. Hollister's passing. Mr. Hollister, though reserved, treated her with consistent respect and seemed genuinely delighted by little James, often asking to hold the baby in the evenings while Katherine cleared the dinner dishes. But it was Zachary who eased her transition most of all. He ensured she had everything she needed for her work, defended her few requests to Hollister, and spent many evenings in her small sitting room, sometimes reading quietly while she sewed, other times telling her stories of the ranch's history or explaining aspects of cattle raising that intrigued her. As April turned to May and James grew stronger daily, Katherine found herself settling into a routine that, while not what she had planned, provided a sense of security she hadn't known since before Patrick's illness. The ranch, with its predictable rhythms and honest work, began to feel like a place she could belong, One evening, as they sat on the small porch outside her quarters watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Zachary cleared his throat awkwardly. "Been meaning to ask," he began, avoiding her eyes. "Your land claim in Clearwater Creek. Have you given any thought to what you'll do about it?" The question caught Katherine off guard. In truth, she had pushed thoughts of her original plan to the back of her mind, focusing instead on the immediate needs of her son and her new position. "I haven't decided," she admitted. "The claim is valid for a year from filing. I have until October to improve the land or forfeit the claim." Zachary nodded, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Just wondered if you still intended to move on. You and James seem to have settled in here." There was something in his tone, a hesitancy, perhaps even a hint of concern that made Katherine study his profile more carefully. "We have," she agreed softly, "more than I expected to." "Hollister thinks highly of you," Zachary continued. "Mentioned yesterday that he hasn't eaten so well since Mary was alive." "He's been very kind," Katherine acknowledged. "Everyone has." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when James began to fuss in his cradle just inside the open door. Katherine rose to attend to him, but Zachary reached out, his hand briefly touching hers. "I'm glad you stayed," he said simply, then withdrew his hand as if surprised by his own boldness. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through Katherine. She had been so focused on survival and providing for James that she had scarcely noticed how her feelings toward Zachary had evolved from gratitude to friendship, and perhaps something more. As she lifted James from his cradle, she found herself wondering about possibilities she hadn't considered before. Could there be a future for her at Double Creek beyond her role as housekeeper? And what of Zachary's interest? Was it merely friendly concern or something deeper? These questions lingered as spring gave way to summer, and the ranch's pace quickened with cattle drives, hay harvesting, and preparations for the fall roundup. Katherine's days were filled with cooking, cleaning, mending, and caring for James, who grew more alert and responsive by the day. Zachary remained a constant presence, though his duties often took him away from the ranch for days at a time as he oversaw distant parts of Hollister's operation. During one such absence, as Katherine kneaded bread dough in the kitchen on a sweltering July morning, Hollister entered with an envelope in hand. "Letter came for you with the supply wagon," he announced, placing it on the table. "From Clearwater Creek Land Office by the look of it." Katherine wiped her hands on her apron before taking the envelope. Inside was a formal notice reminding her that improvements to her claim must be documented by October 15th, or the land would revert to the government. "Bad news?" Hollister inquired, noting her frown. "Just a reminder about my land claim," Katherine explained. "I filed for a homestead near Clearwater Creek before you had James in a broken wagon and ended up here instead," Hollister finished for her. He took a seat at the kitchen table, his weathered face thoughtful. "Been meaning to speak with you about that. Your 3 months is almost up." Katherine's heart sank. She had almost forgotten that her initial employment agreement had been for a trial period of 3 months. "Are you dissatisfied with my work, Mr. Hollister?" "Quite the contrary," he assured her quickly. "Best thing that's happened to this ranch since Mary passed, having you and the little one here. Place feels like a home again." He tapped the letter. "But I won't stand in your way if you're still set on that homestead." "I don't know what I want anymore," Katherine admitted, resuming her bread-making with distracted movements. "When Patrick and I planned this journey, having our own land seemed like the only path forward. Now, with James to consider and no husband to help with the heavy work." "Homesteading alone is a harsh life," Hollister agreed, "especially for a woman with a child." He hesitated, then added, "There are other ways to put down roots, Katherine." She looked up sharply at his use of her given name, something he had never done before. "Sir." Hollister shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I've noticed how Zach looks at you, and how you look at him when you think no one's watching." Heat rose in Katherine's cheeks. Was she so transparent? Mr. Malone has been very kind to us, she said carefully. Kind isn't the word I'd use, Hollister said with a knowing smile. That boy's smitten, plain as day. Problem is, he's got it in his head that he's not good enough for you educated woman like yourself with dreams of your own land. Katherine stared at the dough beneath her hands, her thoughts whirling. Had she misinterpreted Zachary's attentions, or had he been holding himself back out of some misplaced sense of propriety? I don't know what to say, she finally managed. Don't say anything to me, Hollister advised, rising from the table. But maybe consider what you really want before you make any decisions about that land claim. Zach gets back from the North Pasture tomorrow. Might be worth having an honest conversation with him. After Hollister left, Katherine went through her tasks mechanically, her mind replaying every interaction with Zachary over the past months. The gentle way he handled James, teaching the baby to grasp his finger. The evenings spent in comfortable conversation on her porch. The look in his eyes when he thought she wasn't watching a look that mirrored her own conflicted feelings. By the time she heard hoofbeats in the yard the following afternoon, Katherine had made her decision. She waited until after dinner, when Zachary typically stopped by her quarters to say goodnight to James before retiring to his own cabin near the bunkhouse. "Would you join me on the porch?" she asked when he appeared at her door. "There's something I'd like to discuss." Concern flickered across his features, but he nodded, following her outside. The evening was perfect warm with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of summer grass and distant rain. "Is everything all right?" Zachary asked as they settled into the two chairs that had become their customary seats for evening conversations. "I received a letter yesterday," Katherine began. "From the land office in Clearwater Creek. I have to make improvements on my claim by October or forfeit it." Zachary's expression didn't change, but she noticed his hands tighten slightly on the arms of his chair. "I see. Have you decided what you'll do?" "That depends," Katherine said carefully, "on whether I have a reason to stay at Double Creek." The words hung between them, their meaning unmistakable. Zachary's eyes, usually so steady, darted away and then back to her face, as if searching for some sign that he had misunderstood. "Katherine," he began, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain, "I'm not a man of means. I've saved some, but nothing compared to what you deserve. And I know you came west with dreams of your own land, your own home. I came west for a new beginning," she interrupted gently. "For a chance at happiness after losing Patrick. The land was just one way to find that." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I've found something else here, something I wasn't looking for." Zachary leaned forward, hope warring with caution in his expression. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that James and I could make our home here if we had reason to." Katherine's heart hammered in her chest as she continued. "If someone wanted us to stay." The last of Zachary's reserve seemed to crumble. He rose from his chair in one fluid movement, kneeling before her and taking her hands in his. "I've wanted to speak for months," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "But I thought you'd see it as presumption. You came here independent with your own plans. Who was I to impose my feelings?" "The man who delivered my son," Katherine reminded him softly. "The man who said welcome home when James was born." Zachary's grip on her hands tightened. "I meant those words, though I had no right to say them. Something about seeing you there, so brave despite everything, with your son in your arms. It felt like the family I never thought I'd have." "You could have that family," Katherine whispered, "if you want us." The wonder that spread across Zachary's face was answer enough, but his words, when they came, erased any lingering doubt. "I've loved you since that night in the storm," he admitted. "Tried to talk myself out of it 100 times. Told myself you deserved better than a weathered cowboy with nothing but his savings and a foreman's cabin." "You're wrong," Katherine said, reaching out to touch his cheek. "What I deserve is a good man who sees me as I am, not as a widow to be pitied or a woman who needs rescuing, but as a partner." Her voice softened. "You've been that man from the beginning, Zachary Malone." He turned his face to press a kiss against her palm, the gesture achingly tender. I don't have much to offer, but everything I am is yours if you'll have me. You and James both. That's all I need, Katherine assured him, her heart full to bursting. When Zachary finally stood and pulled her gently to her feet, the kiss they shared was both a culmination and a beginning, the first step on a journey neither had anticipated when fate brought them together in a broken wagon during a Wyoming storm. The Double Creek Ranch Chapel hadn't been used for a wedding since Elias Hollister married Mary Thompson 15 years earlier. But on a crisp October morning, with aspen leaves turning gold against an impossibly blue sky, it welcomed a small gathering to witness Zachary Malone and Katherine O'Brien join their lives together. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Mrs. Whitaker had traveled from Lusk for the occasion, bringing with her a cake decorated with fresh berries. Mr. Hollister stood as Zachary's best man, while the ranch hands, scrubbed and uncomfortable in their Sunday best, filled the small chapel's benches alongside neighbors from surrounding homesteads. 5-month-old James, resplendent in a christening gown that Mrs. Whitaker had somehow procured, watched the proceedings from the arms of a young ranch wife who had volunteered to hold him during the ceremony. "Never thought I'd see the day," Hollister remarked as he and Zachary waited for Katherine's arrival. "You were determined to die a bachelor, as I recall." "Plans change," Zachary replied, adjusting his string tie for the 10th time. He had purchased a new shirt and vest for the occasion, and his usually unruly hair had been tamed with liberal application of pomade. "For the better in this case," Hollister observed. Then, more seriously, Mary would have approved. She always said you needed someone who could match your stubborn streak. Further conversation was forestalled by the arrival of Katherine, who entered the chapel on the arm of Dr. Jensen. Her dress, though not new, had been carefully altered to fit her recovered figure, and wildflowers adorned her upswept hair. The minister, a circuit rider who served communities across 3 territories, kept the ceremony brief, acknowledging the realities of ranch life that didn't allow for lengthy celebrations. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary's kiss was restrained but full of promise, bringing a cheer from the assembled guests. The celebration afterward featured the best food Double Creek's larder could provide, music from a fiddle player among the ranch hands, and enough good wishes to last the newlyweds a lifetime. As sunset approached, Hollister surprised them with his gift, the deed to 5 acres of Double Creek land bordering the main ranch, along with lumber already cut for a proper house. "Can't have my foreman and his family living in that one-room cabin forever," he declared gruffly. "Besides, I need Katherine close enough to keep cooking for us all." As darkness fell and lanterns were lit around the ranch yard, Zachary led Katherine away from the festivities toward his cabin, which would be their temporary home until the new house was built. James, exhausted from the excitement, slept peacefully in Katherine's arms. "Are you happy, Mrs. Malone?" Zachary asked as they walked through the golden pool of light from the cabin's window. "More than I ever imagined possible," Katherine admitted. "Though I still can't quite believe how much has changed since that stormy night in May." "Best storm of my life," Zachary said, opening the cabin door. Inside, he had prepared for their arrival with awkward but touching care fresh linens on the bed, wildflowers in a tin cup on the table, and James's cradle positioned near the stove for warmth. Katherine laid James in his cradle, then turned to find Zachary watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. For all their growing closeness over the months, they had maintained a proper distance, mindful of her position at the ranch and the eyes always upon them. Now, alone as husband and wife for the first time, a new shyness overtook them both. "I know it's not much," Zachary said, gesturing to the cabin's sparse furnishings. "The new house will be better proper rooms for everyone." "It's perfect," Katherine assured him, crossing to where he stood. "It's our beginning." Their kiss deepened from tentative to passionate, months of restrained feelings finally finding expression. When they finally broke apart, Zachary rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I never thought I'd find this," he confessed. "After the war, after Elizabeth, I convinced myself I wasn't meant for family life. And now," Katherine prompted, her hands resting against his chest, "now I can't imagine any other life," he said simply. "You and James, you're everything to me." They were still learning each other, this man who had delivered her son, and the woman who had upended his carefully ordered existence. But as they came together in the quiet darkness of the cabin, with James sleeping peacefully nearby, both knew with absolute certainty that the broken wagon that had seemed like disaster had instead been the beginning of their greatest blessing. Winter came early that year, with October snowfall blanketing Double Creek in white. Construction on Zachary and Katherine's new house continued despite the weather, with the ranch hands pitching in during spare hours to ensure the structure would be enclosed before the worst of winter set in. By Christmas, though the interior remained unfinished, the Malones were able to host a small gathering in their new home, a spacious four-room structure with a proper kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a living area centered around a stone fireplace. Mr. Hollister came bearing gifts, a rocking chair for Katherine and a hand-carved wooden horse for James. "First of many children to bless this house, I expect," he remarked with a knowing smile that brought color to Katherine's cheeks. His words proved prophetic sooner than anyone anticipated. By early spring, Katherine was certain she was expecting again, a revelation she shared with Zachary on a rare quiet evening as they sat before their fireplace, James already asleep in his crib in the adjoining room. "A baby," Zachary repeated, his expression shifting from surprise to joy. "Are you certain?" Katherine nodded, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "The signs are the same as with James. The child should arrive in late autumn." Zachary moved from his chair to kneel before her, much as he had on the night they had first acknowledged their feelings. This time, however, there was no hesitation as he placed his hand atop hers. "Our child," he whispered, wonder evident in his voice. "A brother or sister for James." "A family of our own making," Katherine agreed, leaning forward to kiss him softly. That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their new bedroom, Zachary confessed a lingering fear. "I worry sometimes that I'm just a replacement," he murmured against her hair. "That you settled for what was available rather than what you truly wanted." Katherine propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the moonlight streaming through their window. "Is that what you think? That I married you out of convenience?" The vulnerability in his eyes moved her deeply. For all his quiet strength, Zachary carried insecurities born of past rejection and loss. "Patrick was my first love," she acknowledged gently. "I'll always honor his memory, but what I feel for you isn't a replacement for what I lost. It's something entirely new, something that belongs only to us." She took his hand and placed it over her heart. "You aren't second best, Zachary. You're exactly where you belong." His kiss was answer enough, sealing a promise between them that transcended words. The months that followed were filled with work and anticipation as they prepared for the new addition to their family. Zachary threw himself into completing the house, adding finishing touches to make it truly their own shelves for Katherine's books, a window seat where she could sew in natural light, a sturdy corral for the pair of horses that were his wedding gift to her. James grew rapidly, taking his first steps across the living room floor in July and developing a vocabulary that seemed to expand daily. His attachment to Zachary was fierce and unquestioning to him. The tall cowboy had always been his father, a reality that brought tears to Katherine's eyes when she observed their interactions. As her pregnancy progressed, Katherine gradually reduced her duties at the main ranch house, training a young woman from Lusk to take over the cooking while she focused on her own growing family. Hollister, though vocally disappointed to lose her culinary skills, supported the transition wholeheartedly. "Family comes first," he declared when Zachary broached the subject. Besides, you're not going far. I expect regular invitations to dinner at the Malone household. By September, with aspen leaves once again turning gold on the surrounding hills, Catherine's preparations for the new baby were nearly complete. The cradle James had outgrown had been sanded and repainted, tiny garments sewn and stored in the chest at the foot of their bed, and arrangements made for Mrs. Whittaker to journey from Lusk when Catherine's time came. Unlike James's dramatic entry into the world, their second child arrived with relative calm on a clear October night, with Mrs. Whittaker and the ranch doctor in attendance. Zachary paced the living room, James asleep on his shoulder, until Mrs. Whittaker emerged from the bedroom with a bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "You have a daughter, Mr. Malone," she announced with satisfaction. "A perfect little girl with her mother's eyes and your stubborn chin." Zachary accepted the tiny bundle with hands that trembled slightly, gazing down at the red-faced infant with an expression of absolute wonderment. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Welcome to the family." They named her Sarah Elizabeth Malone Sarah for Catherine's mother and Elizabeth in acknowledgement of the woman who had once held Zachary's heart. It was Catherine's suggestion, a gesture of understanding that the past shaped who they had become but did not diminish what they had found together. As winter settled over Double Creek once more, the Malone household adjusted to life with two children. James, initially bewildered by the squalling newcomer who demanded so much attention, gradually developed a protective interest in his sister, bringing his toys to lay beside her cradle and patting her dark hair with clumsy gentleness. Watching her children together, Catherine often found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point, from a widow traveling alone in a precarious wagon to the mistress of her own home, with a husband who looked at her, as though she hung the moon and stars, and children who embodied all their hopes for the future. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside their windows and the children asleep in their rooms, Catherine and Zachary sat before their fireplace, his arm around her shoulders as they enjoyed a rare moment of quiet. "I've been thinking," Catherine said after a comfortable silence. "About the night James was born." Zachary smiled at the memory. "In that broken wagon with the storm howling around us, not likely to forget that night. You said 'welcome home, son,' when you first held him," Catherine recalled. "Do you remember?" "Of course," Zachary confirmed. "It just came out, felt right somehow." "It was right," Catherine said softly. "You were welcoming him home before we even knew where home would be." Zachary tightened his arm around her. "I think I knew even then, something about you and that little boy. It felt like finding something I didn't know I'd lost." Catherine leaned into his embrace, contentment washing over her. "We found each other because of a broken wheel and a thunderstorm," she mused. "What most would call disaster turned out to be our greatest blessing." "Fate," Zachary suggested, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Or divine intervention. Either way, I'm grateful every day for that broken wagon and the chance to deliver our son." "Our son," Catherine echoed, the words still powerful even after months of marriage, "and now our daughter, our family." Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing Double Creek Ranch in pristine white. Inside the Malone home, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting golden light across the living room where a husband and wife sat entwined, their children sleeping peacefully nearby. From disaster had come deliverance, from chance encounter had grown abiding love, and from a broken wagon had emerged a family bound by choice as much as circumstance. For Catherine and Zachary Malone, the journey that began in storm and uncertainty had led to the surest thing either had ever known: a love strong enough to weather any hardship, and a home built not of timber and nails, but of shared dreams and mutual devotion. As they sat together in the firelight on that snowy Christmas Eve, both knew with absolute certainty that the words Zachary had spoken in that desperate moment of James's birth had been prophetic after all. They had all found their way home to each other, and to the life they were building together on the Wyoming frontier. Years passed, and the Malone family flourished along with Double Creek Ranch. James grew into a thoughtful boy with his mother's intelligence and his father's quiet strength, while Sarah developed a spirited nature that kept her parents constantly alert to her latest adventure. In 1880, they welcomed another son, William Elias, named in honor of Mr. Hollister, who stood as the boy's godfather with tears glistening in his usually stern eyes. The ranch prospered under Zachary's management, especially after Hollister gradually began turning over more responsibility to him as age slowed the older man's pace. Katherine, though primarily focused on her growing family, maintained careful accounts for both their household and the ranch operations, her education proving invaluable as Double Creek expanded its breeding program and cattle sales. Their original 5 acres grew to 20, then 50, as they purchased adjoining land and expanded their personal holdings. The house that had seemed so spacious when first built gained additional rooms as the family expanded a proper dining room, a study for Katherine's books and Zachary's ranch ledgers, and eventually a separate bedroom for each child. Through all the changes and growth, they never forgot the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. Each year on James's birthday, Zachary would retell the story of his birth in the broken wagon during the thunderstorm, embellishing the tale slightly with each retelling, until Katherine would laughingly correct his more dramatic inventions. "Your father makes it sound as though he delivered you single-handedly while fighting off wolves and Indians," she would tease to the children's delight. "Just telling it how I remember it," Zachary would reply with a wink. "Bravest thing I ever saw. Your mother bringing you into this world with nothing but determination and courage." On James's 10th birthday, Zachary surprised him with a special gift, a model wagon he had commissioned from the ranch carpenter, complete with a miniature broken wheel. Inside lay a tiny wooden cradle with a carved baby. "To remember where you began," Zachary explained as James examined the detailed craftsmanship, "and to remind you that sometimes what looks like disaster is actually the beginning of something wonderful." James, already showing signs of the thoughtful man he would become, had carefully placed the model on his bedroom shelf, where it remained a treasured possession even as childhood toys were gradually set aside for more mature interests. That same year, Mr. Hollister, whose health had been declining, made a decision that changed the course of the Malones' future once again. Calling Zachary and Katherine to the main house one autumn evening, he revealed his intention to sell them Double Creek Ranch on generous terms, to be paid over 10 years from the ranch's profits. "I have no children to leave it to," he explained, his once robust frame now thin and stooped. "And no one who loves this land more than you two. It should stay with people who understand its value beyond dollars and cents." The offer was unexpected but not unwelcome. Over the years, Zachary and Katherine had come to love Double Creek as their own, pouring their energy and vision into its operation. Accepting Hollister's proposal meant committing to a significant financial obligation, but also secured their children's future in a way they had scarcely dared to dream. "Are you certain?" Zachary asked, stunned by the magnitude of the opportunity. Hollister nodded firmly. "Been certain since I watched you deliver that baby in Mrs. Whittaker's parlor," he said, nodding toward Katherine. "Knew then I'd found my successor. Just took this long to make it official." The papers were drawn up the following week, transferring ownership of Double Creek Ranch, all 15,000 acres, the main house, outbuildings, and cattle to Zachary and Katherine Malone, with Elias Hollister retaining lifetime rights to his quarters in the main house and a modest annual income from the ranch operations. That night, after the children were asleep, Zachary and Katherine sat on their porch, contemplating the enormity of their new responsibility. "Did you ever imagine," Katherine mused, "when you found me in that broken wagon that we'd end up here?" "Owners of one of the largest ranches in the territory," Zachary shook his head, his arm around her shoulders as they gazed at the stars appearing one by one in the deepening twilight. "Couldn't have imagined any of this," he admitted. "You, the children, the ranch. It's more than I ever thought possible for myself." "We've been blessed," Katherine agreed, leaning into his embrace, "though not without struggles." The struggles had indeed been real harsh winters that threatened their cattle, years of drought that withered pastures, financial strains as they expanded their operations, and the ever-present dangers of frontier life. They had weathered a measles epidemic that swept through the territory, claiming several neighboring children though sparing their own. They had faced down cattle rustlers and endured market fluctuations that threatened their livelihood. Through it all, their partnership had remained unshakable. The love that began in crisis had deepened through shared purpose and mutual respect, creating a bond that neither hardship nor prosperity could diminish. As the years continued to pass, they watched with pride as their children grew into adulthood. James, inheriting his father's affinity for ranching and his mother's head for business, gradually assumed more responsibility for Double Creek's operations. Sarah, spirited and independent, surprised them by developing a passion for medicine after assisting the ranch doctor during a particularly difficult calving, eventually traveling east to obtain formal training, one of the few female physicians in the region when she returned. William, their youngest, combined his siblings' best qualities with an artist's sensitivity, documenting the changing landscape of Wyoming through sketches and paintings that eventually gained recognition beyond the territory. Through all the changes, the story of James's birth remained a cornerstone of family lore, retold at gatherings and celebrations as new generations were added to the Malone clan. When James married Emma Jensen, the doctor's daughter, in 1895, Zachary included the tale in his toast at their wedding reception. "20 years ago, I delivered this young man into the world during a thunderstorm with nothing but instinct to guide me," he recalled, his hair now more silver than brown but his eyes still bright. "I told him welcome home, though we had no home to speak of at that moment, just a broken wagon and faith that somehow things would work out. That faith has been rewarded beyond measure." As Zachary and Katherine moved into their later years, they gradually turned over Double Creek's operations to James and his growing family, though they remained active in ranch life well into their 60s. Their home, expanded and improved over the decades, became the heart of an ever-increasing family circle that eventually included grandchildren, and in the early 1900s, the first great-grandchild. In 1910, on their 35th wedding anniversary, the entire extended family gathered at Double Creek for a celebration that lasted 3 days. Tables were set up in the ranch yard, lanterns hung from trees, and music played long into the night as 4 generations of Malones and their friends commemorated not just a marriage, but the legacy that had grown from it. During a quiet moment amidst the festivities, Katherine found Zachary standing alone near the creek that gave the ranch its name, watching the water flow beneath the moonlight. "Penny for your thoughts, Cowboy," she said softly, coming to stand beside him. Though time had etched lines in both their faces and silver had replaced the auburn in her hair, his smile when he turned to her was unchanged from the day they wed. "Just thinking about how it all began," he replied, drawing her into the circle of his arm. "That broken wagon changed everything." "It did," Katherine agreed, resting her head against his shoulder. "Though I believe we would have found each other somehow, broken wagon or not. Some things are simply meant to be." Zachary's arm tightened around her waist. "Maybe so. But I'm grateful for the way it happened, for the chance to deliver our son and welcome him home before I even knew you both would become my home." As they stood together beside the creek, the sounds of their family's celebration drifting on the evening breeze, both knew that the journey that began in crisis had led to the richest of destinations, a life built on love, strengthened by shared purpose, and marked by the joy of creating something lasting together. From a widow's desperate circumstances and a cowboy's chance intervention had grown a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, a family rooted in the Wyoming soil, a ranch that provided for generations, and a story of love that began with 5 simple words spoken in a storm-tossed wagon on the frontier. "Welcome home, son. Welcome home."